For a video this big, I knew I had to find a sponsor, but thankfully Hunt-A-Killer made it easy by reaching out with their brand new Blair Witch edition that they partnered up with Lionsgate to make. And just to be clear, this is a physical package with a ton of cool, unique, individual clues that all piece together to build up a mystery in the Blair Witch universe. Like, check out this notebook. It's got a few of the pages filled out, and I'm sure there's a ton of clues in there, but now I have the perfect place to take notes while I play the game. And you all know how much I love the inclusion of teeth in horror media, so this one's alright. We all know that Halloween is my ride or die, but my second favorite franchise is Blair Witch, so having something like this that's not only canon, but makes me feel like I'm in the movie is next level. With most of the best Halloween events canceled, I've been looking for stuff to do indoors, and trying to figure out what happened to Rosemary Kent's son, who was last seen in the Black Hills Forest, is my kind of October activity. I also think it's worth pointing out that this isn't something you're gonna blow through in an hour. The puzzles are really well thought out, and it's definitely one of those experiences that you get exactly what you put into out of it, which is my kind of thing. I've been playing a lot of horror board games, and unlike those, this one is extremely immersive, and you can actually play it by yourself, which for me is a big plus. On top of that, there's an online community that's spoiler free, so if you get particularly stuck, you can meet up online and maybe make some new friends in the process. Just don't talk to anyone named Ellie Kedward, trust me. I'm also honestly surprised at how much value you're getting in each box, and if you use my link huntakiller.com/Jimmy and then the promo code Jimmy, you'll get 20% off your first box. So huge shout out to Hunt-A-Killer and their new Blair Witch experience for sponsoring this video. Let's jump into the Halloween ranking. October is finally here, and if you don't live in California like I do, the air is getting colder, the leaves are starting to change, and people are putting jack-o'-lanterns and other decorations on their doorsteps. So to kick off the best time of year, I'm finally going to rank all 11 of the Halloween movies that have been released since 1978, all the way up until 2018. I've never done a ranking video on my channel, mostly because my opinions on movies really do change by the day, but I'm definitely not writing off doing more videos like this if you guys like this one. So if you do, let me know down in the comments below, and maybe suggest another franchise I should take a look at in the future. So if your list differs, and it probably will, just keep the one rule of my channel in mind. Don't be a dick about it. Alright, with the intro out of the way, let's get into the list, starting out with my least favorite of the Halloween movies, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009. Instead of being a retread that expands one unexplored area of the original Halloween 2 like his first movie, Rob Zombie decided to do his own thing. For better or worse. Laurie is spiraling after Michael's killing spree, Loomis is a fame whore trying to capitalize on what happened, and Michael is a homeless drifter who actually becomes even more like Jason since his mom's ghost is compelling him to go back to Haddonfield and find his sister. I genuinely like that Zombie explores the aftermath of a slasher and what the trauma that the final girl goes through ultimately does to her, but it strays so far off the beaten path that by the end of it, it barely feels like a Halloween movie. The thing that bothers me most though is that you can see Michael's entire face in a lot of it, and the amount of screen time Sherry Moon Zombie gets with her white horse bullshit feels so forced. And just to be clear, I like that this isn't a retread of Halloween 2. I just feel like so much of what makes a Halloween movie is stripped out in favor of stuff we've seen in Zombie's other stuff, so that it ends up feeling pretty pointless and most of all boring. The critical detail Zombie missed is that once Michael makes those first kills as a child on Halloween night, he becomes the Shape, and from that point forward, I don't really need to know what he's thinking or feeling besides killing everyone who gets in his way on the path to Laurie. There were talks of doing a 3D sequel that existed in both Zombie's universe and the original one, but based on how this one ends, I'm happy it's just a standalone two-part story. I saw this movie back when it came out, and I did not watch it again until 2018 when I reviewed it for my One Good Scare series, and getting through it again for this video was a chore. Halloween Resurrection was a low point for the series, but to really put into perspective how hard this movie bombed, it caused Trancast and Dimension to go back to the drawing board, scrap what they had completely, and greenlight a remake from Rob Zombie. The craziest thing about Resurrection though is that on paper at least, it had everything going for it. Coming off of H2O, the series was in a really good spot. Laurie had finally closed the book on her chapter of the story once and for all, at the time of course, by beheading Michael Myers on camera, so if you think about it, they had a clean slate to work with again. So it still baffles me to this day that they greenlit a sequel to H2O, but instead of doing something original with it, they retconned the awesome ending in a lazy, brain-dead way, and they also threw any originality and goodwill out the window that the series had at that point by mashing up what was popular at the time, Scream and the Blair Witch Project. project. Michael Myers' childhood home becoming a sort of haunted house that kids stay away from again like it was in the first movie is a genuinely cool idea, and they went through so much work to build a facade that looks perfect. And having a group of teens explore it on Halloween night only to come face to face with the shape was and is a great concept by itself that really, if you look at it when Resurrection came out, was ahead of its time. It seems weird watching it now that everyone tuning in thinks it's staged for at least a little bit, but why wouldn't they? It's a live action horror movie streamed to celebrate Halloween, so of course the producers would want to have some of the teens be killed off. Bringing Rick Rosenthal, the director of Halloween 2, back seemed like a good call on paper as well, but the other side of the coin was that he was actually the third choice after two other directors who turned it down. And it kind of goes without saying, but from an execution standpoint, this movie is a complete disaster. The mask is easily one of the worst. It looks like they made it specifically for Michael Myers to wear as a prop in a movie instead of it being a piece of his character like it was in the rest of the franchise. I mean, you can see his eyes perfectly and it humanizes him way too much. It's like they weren't even trying. The edgy main cast is unlikable to the point that you're actively rooting for him to kill them, which is a good thing depending on how you feel, but even those scenes are uninspired to the point that they're honestly kind of boring. Like the blonde chick getting her head cut off should be cool, but the head itself looks so fake, and why was there no blood? The visual style and tone are completely different from H2O as well, so tying it into that movie so closely when it's completely standalone after the intro stings. And like all of the worst sequels, the story is needlessly complicated. It would have worked just as well, if not better, without the stupid retcon. The slasher genre was not in a good place in the early 2000s. I mean, the best movies it had to offer at the time were essentially well-made parodies, and while it would have been great for a Halloween movie to come out and remind us why we were all scared of the boogeyman to begin with, it did help set the stage for Rob Zombie's remakes and eventually Halloween 2018. And even though, in my opinion at least, it's a pretty bad movie, it's a lot of fun to watch, and every time it comes up on Sci-Fi, I legally am obligated to throw it on my TV. Third to last, we have Rob Zombie's Halloween remake, which came out in 2007, and this is the first Halloween movie I got to see in theaters. And while I enjoy it for what it is, just like its sequel and Resurrection, it really has an identity crisis. Rob Zombie did have an interesting thought by modernizing the story and focusing more on what made Michael become the shape in the first place, because as we've seen time and time again, trying to outdo Carpenter never pays off. The problem with that new section of the movie is that it gives me deja vu in the sense that it's just every single other Rob Zombie movie condensed down into the span of an hour. You've got a white trash family screaming every word that comes out of their mouth, an over-sexualized character for Sherry Moon Zombie to play, and a few extremely brutal kills that kind of betray the character he wrote for Dag Furch. Once it moves past the child chapter, it does get a lot better, but from that point forward, it's a paint-by-numbers remake, and by the end of it, Michael just feels like Jason wearing a different mask. Atmosphere goes such a long way in this franchise, and even some of the worst entries in it got that better than Rob Zombie's first effort. Tyler Mane looks awesome in the coveralls though, especially with his subtly redesigned mask that still holds up over 10 years later. It's also cool that Zombie brought Danielle Harris back because she was the main character in the franchise for a lot of the people who would be calling this the first R-rated movie they saw in theaters, like me. And after watching it for this video, Ken Foree's Death Scene still holds up as one of my favorites in the entire series, just because it seems like Rob Zombie is having a blast filming it on the other side of the camera. I don't think it's a bad movie by any means, but if you told me Rob Zombie was remaking Halloween, it's exactly what I would expect it to be, so that's why it's forgettable and why it ranks so low on my list. In the 8th spot on my list, I have Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, which is the second Halloween movie I ever saw. This one's also actually pretty similar to Resurrection, because it's a follow-up to a really good entry in the series that tosses literally all of that goodwill out the window. Picking up during the ending of Halloween 4, where Michael Myers is blown to bits, we get one of those retcons the franchise is famous for, where we see a wounded Michael tumble into a river where he's rescued and nursed back to health by a drifter. The director, Dominique Othenin-Girard, took it upon himself to ignore the transference of the spirit of Samhain to Jamie, and instead she's in 24/7 psychiatric care. Oh, and she's mute for some reason. Honestly, it's comical how many dumb moves the script in Halloween 5 makes. From the completely ridiculous mask to the introduction of Tina and the corny music that plays whenever the cops are on screen, it's almost impossible to understand why it was released in this state. These movies were made for virtually nothing, and looking back at the profit margin of Halloween 4, it actually would have made sense to just start over. There are a lot of bad masks in the Halloween franchise, but Halloween 5's has got to be one of the worst. It's unique, sure, but it's so far off from the the original that it looks something like the asylum would use in a movie called Halloween Slasher. Also, what the hell even happened to the Myers house? Bringing the story back to that setting was a cool Easter egg, but damn, they couldn't just go to California and get a few shots of the outside of the real house? It's embarrassing. On top of all that, Gerard decided it would be a cool idea to kill off one of the best characters in the entire franchise by having Michael stab her with a pair of scissors, which really just shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what movie he was making. Also, having Michael cry on camera, like what a joke. There are two saving graces in this movie, the first of which of course being Jamie Lloyd, because she's super easy to empathize with once again, and the fact that Loomis has completely given in to his obsession with Michael to the point that he uses Jamie as bait. It's ridiculous, but I kinda love it. It's no secret that Halloween 5 was rushed as it came to theaters only a year after Halloween 4, and there is some effort being done to restore some lost footage that sounds really cool, but as the old saying goes, you can't polish a turd. Looking at the Halloween franchise as a whole, it's really easy to mark when big shifts in tone happen, and even though it's the end of a trilogy, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, is one of the biggest shifts of all. That mainly comes down to the fact that there was a bidding war between 5 and 6, which resulted in Dimension Films making this one. After Halloween 5 bombed at the box office, Mustafa Akkad decided to take a break for a few years until Daniel Farrens approached him with a script that took the entire series so far into account, and advanced the story surrounding the Man in Black and the thorn symbol on Michael's wrist. I don't really have any issues with this approach, mainly because leaving Jamie Lloyd's plotline unresolved after the huge cliffhanger that Halloween 5 ends on would be absolutely insane. But with that being said, the movie we ultimately got has some interesting ideas and some really good fall atmosphere, but the fighting that went on during post-production and the overcomplicated script stop it from being the triumphant finale it could have easily been. Out of all the issues I have with this movie, the biggest is 100% killing off Jamie Lloyd in the intro. I grew up watching Halloween 4 and 5 on AMC Fear Fest every year, and when I found out about Halloween 6, I was really excited to see how things wrapped up. So watching it and seeing one of my favorite horror movie characters go out as an adult after outsmarting Michael as a kid, and that she was impregnated by him, turned me off to the movie completely. There are some cool aspects I've come to appreciate as concepts like the inclusion of Tommy Doyle, the fact Loomis ultimately becomes Michael's keeper, and the amount of effort that went into roping in the actual holiday of Halloween. It also has to be said that the coveralls and mask are a huge step up from both Halloween 4 and 5. Sure, Michael might be a little chubbier than we remember this time around, but it's awesome that the Thorn Cult is providing him with new gear before sending him out on a kill. The sculpt on the mask also looks great, honestly as close to the original as any sequel had gotten at that point. The crazy hair does give it a different look, but I'm gonna give them a pass. And it's awesome that George P. Wilbur was brought back to play Michael again and close out his trilogy. Finally, the mid-90s Metallica style score was a great choice for the time because it really makes it feel like we're entering a new era of Halloween movies. Between the producers and the theatrical cut, it's pretty much a wash for me because for every great change that the producer's cut makes, there's also a big negative that comes along with it. And if you're like me and you really want to see Michael Myers pull off some really cool kills, go with the theatrical cut. And now we're getting to the good stuff with Halloween H2O 20 years later. And if you look at all the different timelines of the Halloween franchise, the one that this one exists in, where you go from Halloween to Halloween 2 to H2O, it's pretty tough to beat. Jamie Lee Curtis made her triumphant return to the series for the first time since 1981 too, so having that combined with the fact that the movie is actually good, sign me up. The problem is, I was only 5 years old when it came out, and I wasn't even really aware of it until around 2011 when James Rolfe reviewed it in his Monster Madness series. Despite that, it's cool because you can really see the transition from 90s horror in Halloween 6 to early 2000s horror in H2O, for better or worse. As far as atmosphere goes, the intro to this movie is second on the list in my opinion after Halloween 4 at capturing the feeling of Halloween. It has to be addressed that there's no BS involved in bringing Michael back. It's been 20 years since his first rampage, and for some reason, he's decided to return and finally kill off Laurie once and for all. It's epic. And after the complicated backgrounds of the last two movies, it's nice to be brought back to the simplicity of the first 2 and 4. Where H2O starts to lose me is its setting, which I completely acknowledge isn't its fault. I know it's stubborn, but when I think of Halloween, I think of fall, jack-o'-lanterns, and the cold blue atmosphere of the first movie, not California, which would be like 80 degrees at that time of year. Speaking of Laurie, her plot progression in this movie is fucking awesome. She is on the warpath, and if Michael Myers could feel like anything, he'd probably be scared of her this time around. Her kid John is also cool enough, but his plotline is a little messy and his friends are kind of a drag. It feels like they focus tested it, and some executives said to make it feel like I Know What You Did Last Summer. The main thing stopping H2O from ranking higher on my list is the messiness involving the costume. There are 4 different masks used throughout this movie, one of them being digital, and none of them do it for me. Also, some of the stuff Michael does, like dropping down from this pipe, honestly make me laugh, which I don't think was the desired effect. It's like a wrestling move. Still, while it's hard to get a more definitive ending than Halloween 2, this one holds the up, and if it came out just a couple years later, it'd probably be ranked a lot higher on my list. I just don't have the nostalgia that everyone else does for it. And now comes Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. I will never forget the first time I saw this movie because it aired on AMC Fear Fest right after Halloween 2, and man was I confused. I was waiting and waiting for Michael Myers to show up, and he never did. So I went to bed pretty frustrated, and in elementary school the next day, I got in trouble because I was talking about the guy who poured gasoline on himself and blew himself up. But because it was AMC Fear Fest, it aired again that night, so I went into it knowing that Michael Myers wasn't in it, and I appreciated it a lot more. Even though movies that came out after rank above it on this list, I wish I lived in the reality where the original plan of making a new standalone Halloween movie every year is what happened. And even though everyone on film Twitter wants to pretend they've always been a diehard fan of Halloween 3, I actually have, and I got bullied for it, and I still think this movie is incredibly underappreciated. Halloween 3 was so ahead of its time with the way it actually incorporates the holiday into its sinister plot, and like all of the best movies Carpenter had his hands on, it's so much more ambitious than its budget allows. Tom Atkins playing a womanizing mustachioed doctor who just wants to ignore his bitch ex-wife and bang chicks half his age simply rules. Just like Snake Plissken in Escape from New York or Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China, he plays the part of the reluctant hero so perfectly that I really don't have anything to criticize. The effects are some of the best the 80s had to offer in my opinion, and images of the lady's destroyed face in the hotel room or the dead kid with snakes and cockroaches crawling out of his mask have literally haunted me my entire life. Like all the best horror movies, the plot is relatively simple, and it even incorporates a villain who's evil for the sake of it because he believes in the original meaning of Halloween. It also incorporates the best 80s horror setting, a hospital, and manages to not feel derivative of Halloween 2 at all before moving into an idyllic Irish town in Northern California, which gives it a great sense of isolation. I wish it had just a few shots in the Midwest to cut to when kids are trick-or-treating, but that's a minor nitpick, and the silver shamrock masks do a good enough job at providing some Halloween atmosphere. If you're one of those people who didn't like Halloween 3 when it came out and you haven't seen it in a long time, I would highly suggest checking it out again because it holds up. I'd love to hear what you think of it on second watch too, because I think it's awesome. Now's where I think I'm going to start making some people a little mad, because in the fourth spot on my list is Halloween 2. And when it comes to Halloween 2, there's a lot of good to talk about, so that's where we're going to start. First up, starting during the end of Halloween and continuing from there was such a cool idea that I don't think had been done before in any consequence at that time. It turned Laurie's fear into desperation, and it was super smart of Rosenthal to compensate for that with a much more brutal Michael. Even though it is the same night, he's had a lot of practice killing people, and it makes sense for him to open up, for a lack of a better term, and start having some fun. Halloween 2 also gets major bonus points for hinting at Samhain and the origins of Halloween, because it gives Michael a little bit of backstory that doesn't humanize him in any way. Successfully following up a literally perfect movie is near impossible, but Halloween 2 makes a great case for its existence because in reality, if Michael wasn't there after Loomis shot him at the end of Halloween, he wouldn't just let him go. We also get way more scenes of people out in the streets trick-or-treating, which adds to the Halloween feel, and since it takes place exclusively at night, it hides a lot of the stuff in the first movie that reminds you it was shot in California. And what else can I say? It's got a character named Jimmy who doesn't suck. The mask looking so different, even though it was the same one from the first movie, still kind of bums me out, and weird moments like Ben Tramer's death just show laziness that wasn't there the first time around, but both points are easily forgivable for me personally. Halloween 2 is a movie I adored the first time I saw it at around 6 years old, but every time I've watched it since, my appreciation has shrunk just a little bit, and that really comes down to the fact that it's overcomplicated. The first video that really blew up on my channel was one where I explained why Halloween 2 had to go for Halloween 2018 to work, so if you want more in-depth reasoning, go check that out. But long story short, the sister plotline that this movie introduces planted a really bad seed that grew into a really bad plant. Making Michael a relative of Laurie Strode kind of eliminated any true fear I had of the character at the time because it gave me an out. If I wasn't friends or a relative of Laurie Strode, I was safe. The boogeyman just wasn't gonna come for me, and as a kid who was lucky enough to grow up with these movies, I wanted to believe that he could be standing behind my door at night. It also sets the stage for nearly every sequel that follows it, because if you want to stick to the story of the first two movies, you always have to have a Strode at the center, and that's a trap Scream 5 is definitely going to suffer from next year. Mark my words. But at the end of the day, I still love Halloween 2, it just doesn't feel as special to me in 2020 as it did back in the 90s. We're in the top 3 now, and in that third spot is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. And this movie is really special to me because not only is it the first Halloween movie I ever saw, but it basically ignited my love for horror. Try and imagine what it was like being 6 or 7 years old and not only seeing Michael Myers for the first time, but also seeing him through the eyes of someone who's your age. If you can't imagine it, I'll tell you what it was like. It was fucking terrifying. After people lost their minds over a Halloween movie without Michael Myers, Dwight H. Little brought him back with a vengeance, and he started that movie with the best intro to any movie I've ever seen. The shots of wide open farmland at twilight, wind howling and blowing dust onto classic decorations without a single soul in sight is exactly what I think of when someone says the word Halloween. Exactly 10 years after his first rampage through Haddonfield, Michael Myers suddenly wakes up after hearing he has a living niece, and as a fuck you to muscle atrophy, he puts his thumb straight through a paramedic's forehead. Hell yeah. After that, the plot is simple. Michael reassembles his costume and hunts down his niece, Jamie Lloyd, while Dr. Loomis is always one step behind. Look, I get it. The mask sucks in this movie and it looks like Michael is wearing football pads, but man, this one has an energy that I don't think any other movie in the series has matched yet. There's so many excellent moments, like a mini siege at the sheriff's house, Michael riding on top of a pickup truck, blowing out the power by throwing a guy onto the transformer. The list goes on and on. Rachel is awesome and she's surprisingly well written too. She's introduced as a selfish teenager who's mad about having to take care of her foster sister, and by the end she'd do anything to protect her. I'm adopted, so that always made me really happy because so many adoption plots are about the kid finding their real parents, but in my opinion, your parents are the people who raised you. I wish I was smart enough to record Halloween 4 to VHS when I was younger because watching this movie with commercials would be a nostalgia overload. Is it a better movie than Halloween 2? I don't know. My opinion changes by the day, but I love it and this is my list, so I'm putting it in number 3. The second highest slot on my list goes to Halloween 2018, the recalibration the series was in dire need of after Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. The timing couldn't be better for this movie to come out either. It had been almost 10 years since a new Halloween movie had dropped, and the same went for Freddy and Jason. It was time for slashers to come back in a big way. Just like in Halloween 4, he's been dormant for years, and even though he's being treated as a human being, we all know that there's a supernatural force driving him, so when he manages to escape, it just works. And thankfully, he doesn't immediately go after Laurie Strode once he reassembles his costume. He heads to the busiest street he can find and goes on a rampage from house to house in a one take that puts so much of the other movie's shot work to shame. Michael's a lot more brutal in this movie, and it kind of seems like David Gordon Green is answering the question, why would a guy who's killed a few teens 40 years ago even be scary in 2018? The confidence he has murdering multiple people while kids and parents are just a few feet away trick-or-treating is exactly what this movie needed, and it gets my heart racing every time I watch it. The mask and the costume as a whole are absolutely perfect, and James Jude Courtney does the character justice in a way that nobody has since Halloween 2. 2018's Laurie is similar to H2O's, but instead of being a boarding school headmaster with a drinking problem, she's a doomsday prepper with a drinking problem. As much as I love the idea of Laurie being successful in spite of what happened to her, this movie's outlook is a lot more realistic, and while some scenes like when she comes to the restaurant are a little hammy, it makes her drive to kill Michael a lot more believable. The camera work, the soundtrack, the introduction of Andy Matichak as Allison Strode in the intro credits, it all has the feeling of the original movie, and John Carpenter's endorsement makes it that much better. This might be a little controversial, but his score is the best in the entire franchise. I had it on the whole time I was writing this video, and the script for this bad boy is 11 pages. For me, Halloween 2018 transcends nostalgia, and while I get that it bothers some people it didn't deliver on the promise of the final showdown between Michael and Laurie, we're getting 2 more movies that are shaping up to be great, so what's to complain about? It's easy to chalk up Halloween 2018's ranking to recency bias, but it's been 2 years. I've seen it 9 or 10 times now, and I love it just as much as I did when I saw it in Salem, Massachusetts 2 years ago. And now I have no doubt in my mind that just like he did in the 70s and 80s, Michael Myers is going to usher in a new age of slashers for Freddy and Jason, and that's an awesome feeling. Well, we've come to the number 1 spot on my list, and the honor goes to none other than John Carpenter's Halloween. I'm sure you guys couldn't have guessed that one right from the beginning. It kinda goes without saying, but not only is this my favorite Halloween movie, it's just straight up, bar none, my favorite movie of all time. I'm almost 28 years old at this point, and for my entire life, Halloween has been my favorite day of the year. Seeing John Carpenter's Halloween for the first time when I was around 10 took all that excitement and bottled it up into a movie that I think is literally perfect. It's as simple as they come for one thing, and it answers the question why with Does It Matter? Michael Myers crossed paths with Laurie and her friends on Halloween night, and whether they knew it or not, it sealed their fates. Giving a slasher a backstory can and has worked before, but the fact that Michael woke up one day and decided he was going to murder his older sister personified him as pure evil that couldn't be killed. It's beyond understanding, sort of like the feeling that waking up on October 1st brings, and that's why I've always been able to spend countless hours writing, talking about, and editing videos about it. And in case it wasn't clear, you're also a big reason why I love this movie so much. So if you've ever watched one of my Halloween videos, all I have to say is thank you and happy Halloween. It's finally done, my official ranking of the Halloween franchise. This one's been a long time coming, so I hope you had as much fun watching it as I did making it. Now I'd love to hear your rankings down in the comments below, and if you're new here, I'd really appreciate a subscription. And for those of you awesome people who watch all the way to the end, I'm just gonna say head back here on October 16th. I've got something pretty damn cool for you guys to check out. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.